folks. This is Storm Knight. I'm here to do some reading here from the series that got my name, or that I got my screen name from. So, it is for the role-playing game Torg. It is the trilogy that started the role-playing game and set up the world. And we are just getting a little more people collected here. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So the first book is called appropriately Storm Knights by Bill Slavisek and C.J. Trameltata. You'll probably find these books in secondhand stores everywhere, and if you want to give it a shot here, go ahead and read these. They're a nice read. They're a short read. These are short chapters. So without further ado, let's go. So, the first book is Torg, Storm Knights. Originally published in 1990. Prologue. Oh, by the way, I do have to apologize here in advance for the room being as bright as it can. I do not have my standard recording equipment with me since I am traveling. So, without further ado, if you have problems, let me know. I will be going along here. If it's too bright, too loud, too soft, give me a heads up in chat, and I will go ahead and do the adjustments. So we'll start with the prologue, the near now. Later today, early tomorrow, sometime next week, the world began to end. When they chased you, you ran. If you were a step too slow, or if you twisted an ankle and went sprawling on the hot sand, then you were dead. Correction. If they chased you, you were already dead. It was only a matter of time before your heart stopped pumping and your blood ran red to stain the ground where you fell. The young man with the light brown skin knew none of this. He simply ran, faster and faster beneath the gathering clouds, until his side hurt and his chest pounded. He had no thought as to where he was running to, just as long as it was away from the horror behind him, away from the atrocity that his mind wished he had never seen. He ran until each stride sent waves of pain through his body, and still he kept moving, although now the run became a trot, then a fast walk, then a shuffle, and then the young man had to stop. Only for a moment, he told himself as he collapsed in the sand, just to catch his breath. His eyes closed as exhaustion overtook him. After running most of the night and through the early morning, even fear could not keep it at bay. So, in the hot sand, under the hot sun, mere yards from the lapping waves, the young man slept. He didn't notice the passing minutes, didn't stir as dark clouds moved in and blocked out the sun. He never heard the terrible wings that flapped closer, never felt the foul breeze of their approach. But he felt the weight that pressed down on his back and then jarred him back to consciousness. The young man opened his eyes and tried to rise, but the weight held him fast. He could hear heavy breathing above him, could smell a foul stench that burned its way up his nose and into his lungs. He coughed and his eyes watered. As the young man blinked away the tears, he saw a figure approaching up from out of the jungle. The figure was tall, gaunt, skeleton thin. From the young man's angle, looking up from the sand and through the watering eyes, the figure appeared exaggerated, as though seen through a funhouse mirror. The figure wore a long black coat and a tall black hat, but seemed unaffected by the humid heat. A shoulder cape billowed as he strode forward, casually swinging an ornate walking cane. His crisp steps stopped a few feet from the young man's face, a face which was reflected in the figure's shiny black boots. The tall figure knelt down, resting his cane across his knees. He smiled at the young man, and his gaunt features stretched even thinner, revealing a skeletal visage beneath the broad brim of his hat. "You led us on a merry chase, young man," the gaunt man said, speaking clearly in the young man's language. At least, the young man heard it as his language. But like all stormers, you became tired, careless. Never any real challenge at all, you must admit. "Let me up and I'll show you a challenge, thin man," the young man said, forgetting his fear for a moment. The weight on the young man's back pressed down, and something sharp and pointed cut through his shirt and pierced the surface of his skin. He bit back a scream of pain, trying to ignore the hot stickiness spreading across his back. "No, my pet, not yet," cautioned the gaunt man as he rose to his full height. He turned in place with his arms outstretched, taking in great gulps of air. "Smell the possibilities in the air," the gaunt man exclaimed. "Oh, this world is rich. I have chosen well this time, my pet. Very well indeed." He spun again. His visage changed. Anger filled his cold eyes, and for a moment the young man saw that his finery was ragged and moth-eaten. But then the head of his cane was shoved towards the young man's face. "What should I do with you, Storm?" the gaunt man asked. The cane twirled dangerously close, and the young man could see the carved dragon head spinning before his eyes. The dragon held something firmly in its toothy maw, a strange and beautiful gem of some sort, filled with swirls of blue and red. Then the gaunt man pulled it away. His finery was perfect again. "Perhaps the machine would suit you, Storm." "Yes, the machine." "What are you afraid of, thin man?" asked the young man. "Do I scare you?" The gaunt man did not answer. He simply stepped back and smashed his cane into the sand. Then the weight on the young man's back shifted and he felt the claws. Sharp, tearing, eager claws. His eyes snapped wide when the ripping began, full of fear and pain and light. He noticed rather detachedly that a bright splash of red stained the gaunt man's polished black boots. The light in the stormer's eyes faded slowly as the rain began to fall, but the ripping continued for a long, long time. The clouds gathered. I watched the dark clouds gather. I saw them fill the sky. I felt the waves of thunder. The lightning didn't die. Eddie Parrott. There isn't always a silver lining hiding behind a dark cloud. Sometimes what's back there is much, much worse. Quinn Sebastian. Chapter 1. In his third floor floor, walk-up apartment on Flatbush Avenue. Mario Doselli cursed loudly. He looked out the window at the darkening sky. There was a storm coming. No doubt about it. But maybe it would have the common courtesy to wait until the ball game was over? No way, he decided. The storm clouds were so black that it was like night outside. Great! On opening day, too. He flipped on his radio and hunted for the all-news station, hoping for a weather report. He twisted the dial this way and that, fighting to hear through the static. Damn! The static was bad today. And around the world, with Indonesia. That's it, Doselli thought, tuning in the reporter's voice as best he could. Repeating our lead story, all communication with Indonesia has ceased, said the calm news voice coming out of Doselli's radio. An American satellite tracking station noted the occurrence quietly, expecting communications to resume after Indoconsat 3 was realigned. But now other countries are reporting that the satellite is working perfectly, or it would be if there were any signals for it to relay. As far as radio waves, phone lines, microwaves, and all forms of electronic communication are concerned, Bali has ceased to exist, as have Sumatra, Java, Borneo, Celebes, the Moluccas, and all of the islands of the Malay archipelago. We switch now to Arthur Cross in Australia. Arthur? A new voice spoke on the radio. No messages blurted from the fax machines this morning. No radio or television signals bounced off orbiting satellites. Nothing was transmitted from the part of the world we call Indonesia except ominous silence. Who cares, Doselli said angrily as he switched off the radio. You can't even get a decent weather report in this town anymore. Maybe they'll get in a couple of innings at least. Doselli opened a can of beer, cradled a bowl of popcorn in his left arm, and sat in his favorite chair. He hunted momentarily for the remote, found it on the chair cushion beneath him, and aimed it at the silent television. Let's play ball, he whispered, as he pointed and clicked the remote, bringing the television to life. Chapter 2. Police officer Rick Adler would remember opening day for the rest of his life. The moment was caught in his mind like some foul taste that couldn't be rinsed away. He was assigned to crowd control duty outside Shea Stadium, on his horse, direct from police stables in New York's Flushing Meadows Park. Overhead, the sky was growing increasingly darker as it filled with bloated black clouds. Alder was certain that he would be drenched before the day was out. He even looked forward to a light turnout for the game, but no such luck. The fans were filing in by the thousands, an almost endless line of bodies flowing down from the number 7 line and out of the filled parking lots. They were all here to watch Walter "The Truth" Jones throw the first pitch of the new baseball season, to witness David "Sky-High" Glass belt his first home run. And while Officer Adler loved the Mets as much as the next New Yorker, he would much rather be at home with the millions of other fans, watching from the comfort of his home with a cold beer in one hand and a hot dog in the other, than atop a horse in a sea of excited humanity. Inside the stadium, Alder could hear the grandstands filled to capacity. It was a sound like no other. Loud, a constant murmur welling towards an explosion that would accompany the introduction of the home team. Overhead, a bolt of lightning cut the sky. Beneath him, Alder's horse became skittish, and it took more effort than the usual to control the animal. As a matter of fact, the horse had been tense all day, as though it sensed the coming storm. Hang on, Simone, he whispered soothingly. Those clouds scare me too. Alder tried to turn his attention back to the stadium and its familiar noises. He could hear the vendors as they moved through the packed tiers and rows, each hawking his wares in his own special way. Some were showmen flamboyantly tossing their bags of peanuts and good-naturedly rushing the passage of crumpled, sweaty dollar bills as they were passed from hand to hand, from buyer to seller. Some were clowns, dispensing banter and beer with a flip turn of a phrase and a filled paper cup. Some were priests, solemnly handing out the mustard-splashed hot dog sacraments of this American rite of spring. Some just wanted to do their jobs and go home. Alder smiled. He could identify with that sentiment. The police officer navigated his mount towards the open portion of the stadium. From there he could look over the fence and see the crowds. It was too far away to see more than a sea of millions swaying bodies. He imagined the fans smiling and waving, jostling and joking. He imagined them sweating in the afternoon humidity, just as he was, waiting for the game to start. The energy was tangible. Even from the spot outside, Alder felt the almost religious fervor. He knew by the subtle change in the roar that the guest singer was walking out to perform the national anthem. It was that young rock star, Eddie Paragon, teen idol and music video superstar. The crowd cheered and quieted as Paragon stepped up to the microphone halfway between home plate and the pitcher's mound. There was a pause. An Alder imagined young man scanning the crowd. Then he began to sing. Alder listened as Paragon's rich voice echoed from the stadium loudspeakers, proclaiming the virtues of our star-spangled banner. He ended well, perhaps better than most, on those high, awkward notes that are such an integral part of the anthem. Then the roar of the crowd resumed, louder, more frenzied than before. It was crazy. It was exciting. Alder could feel himself getting caught up in the moment. A pretzel vendor who knew Alder by sight moved his cart closer. He nodded to Alder as he adjusted the volume on his radio. An announcer's voice emerged from the tiny black box hanging from the cart's umbrella, describing the scene at Shea. "Here they come," the radio announced. "The New York Mets." Now the crowd was standing and cheering, welcoming home the team to another good great season. But Alder wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the sky. The clouds directly over him, over the stadium, were crackling with flashes of lightning, jagged streaks of white slashing through the blackness. "My God," said the pretzel vendor. "What's happening? Come on, man, tell me, what's happening?" The horse paced nervously, but Alder didn't notice. Suddenly he was seeing two separate events that were occurring simultaneously. His eyes were watching the sky, fixed on the boiling clouds and lightning. His mind was imagining the scene in the stadium, forming pictures of the radio announcer's words. He saw the clouds swirl as the winds picked up. He heard the stands rock with thunderous applause as Walter the Truth Jones stepped up to the mound. He saw the fear reflected in the pretzel vendor's eyes as a bolt of lightning cracked the sky. He heard the thunderous hush as the Truth's arm pulled back. He felt every eye turn to watch the Truth's leg kick up. The first pitch of the new season was about to be thrown, full of all the promise and anticipation of the new baseball season, full of possibility. Alder watched in fascination as something moved behind the clouds. Something was coming. "And here's the pitch," screamed the announcer. "It's a rocket heading on a straight course for Salter, outstretched glove. What a fastball, what a..." Suddenly, the dark clouds erupted, spewing forth a wave of crackling energy that rained down around the stadium as far as Alder could see. Inside Shea, the ball never reached the plate. Outside, the radio announcer never finished his sentence. The radio abruptly stopped broadcasting. The lights of Shea snapped off, and even Alder's walkie-talkie stopped squawking. Alder barely noticed, though, because the clouds were still rumbling. They parted then, and a hole opened in the sky. It's the only way the police officer could describe it. A hole! And in that hole was an even more terrible storm that whirled. The horse was striding away from the stadium, snorting and neighing its protest to the unnatural events. Alder did not try to control her trek. His attention was locked onto the events occurring overhead. With a powerful clap of thunder and a display of lightning, something fell from the sky. It dropped onto Shea Stadium, crushing a huge section of the facility and the crowded parking lot beyond into rubble. It was a twisting, massive mass of greens and browns, more than half a mile across, a fairy tale beanstalk formed from a gigantic, impossible jungle. It had fallen at a different angle. Had it fallen at a different angle, had it missed its mark by a dozen yards, Alder would have been crushed too. The beanstalk arced broadly upward, a growing ladder, cable-thick vines, broad, man-sized leaves, and impossibly long, sharp thorns. Massive, it curved upwards past the edge of visibility, back into the dark clouds. The horse was picking up speed now, and Alder tightened his grips unawares. He could not look away from the ruins of Shea Stadium. How many dead were in there, he wondered. But the scene had not really registered in his mind yet, so he only watched. Next, from the hole in the sky, another wave of swirling energy swept down the beanstalk and exploded over what remained of the stadium. Then it rolled out in all directions, smashing into Alder and his horse and sending him sprawling. Pain racked the officer, but he was able to raise his head and watch as the spectacle continued. Down through the dark growth crawled, slithered, hunched, and flapped a terrible assortment of creatures. It took a moment to register, but Alder recognized these beasts. They were dinosaurs and other prehistoric monsters, or at least someone's warped version of such, including those that walked on two legs and carried spears and other weapons. They covered the top of the jungle beanstalk completely, an unending stream of monsters moving down from the storm into Shea. They walked upon the growing pathway, standing perpendicular to its broad expanse. Unlike the fairy tale beanstalk, this was not a ladder. It was more a bridge, connecting Earth to someplace else. Alder could not see into the stadium, but he heard the screams. Whoever that bridge did not kill when it smashed into the ground, the creatures dispatched, swiftly and from the dying sounds, with no remorse. Giant serpents that stretched over 30 feet slithered down the jungle bridge, their green and brown scales rippling as they moved. Small feathered lizards leaped from branch to branch. Four-legged beasts with tentacle snouts pushed through the twisting vines, and an odd assortment of almost creatures rushed down into Shea. Almost because they resembled dinosaur toys Alder played with as a boy, there were startling differences. There was an almost Tyrannosaurus Rex with a large Godzilla spikes jutting from its back. There was an almost Paleontyssus with three thorny tails smashed through the overgrowth. And there was an almost Allosaurus flapped its great wings and swooped towards the ground. Alder struggled to his feet. He had his service revolver, his radio, his nightstick, and for a moment he was contemplating some desperate action. But then he saw the stream of monsters part, making way for an almost Triceratops. The large, one-horned monster reminded the police officer of the three-horned dinosaur with the armor-plate head he had loved as a child. But there were important differences, not the least of which was a large dinosaur man riding its back and the single horn jutting from its head. That dinosaur man was the leader, Alder knew. He felt it in his gut. And nothing that police officer Rick Adler could do against that being would be enough to save the people inside Shea. Simone had remained nearby when Alder had fallen. The officer assumed that with all the craziness going on around him, the horse had decided to focus on something familiar, like the guy in blue who took her for a ride every now and then and gave her sugar cubes. So Alder struggled back into the saddle, trying to ignore the pain in his right knee. Then, without a look back, Alder and his horse rode off. They only galloped for a few seconds when the sky opened up again and the rain fell. Alder noted wryly that the storm was as bad as he imagined it was going to be. He didn't know that the storm was just beginning. and it was going to get much worse. Give me a minute here, nice little drink here. Sorry, just letting the throat here. Chapter 3. Christopher Bryce pulled the collar of his coat tight around his neck. For a spring day, it felt like late fall. The sky was gray and a chill wind whipped down the quiet streets of Queens. All he needed, on top of everything else, was to catch a cold while taking a stroll. He walked on, no real destination in mind. His physical actions were a reflection of his mental processes. As his mind wandered, so did his feet. He found himself in a shopping area, one of those neighborhoods in the boroughs of New York that were trying to appeal to Manhattanites who didn't want to or couldn't afford to live in Manhattan anymore. Bryce stopped at a bookstore window out of habit, glancing to see what was on display. What he saw was his own reflection. His bulbous nose and red beard were visible beneath his totes hat. His coat collar had slipped open again, revealing the white of his priestly collar. 34 years old, Bryce thought. My face carries a mark for every year. He collapsed the collar of his secular outerwear, covering up evidence of his priestly calling, Bryce thought as he gazed at his unimposing reflection. What did calling really mean? He wondered. And would he ever get an answer? Wasn't that the crux of the problem? Bryce turned to go when a book cover caught his eyes. It was a book of Arthurian legends, all about King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. The illustration on the cover was of a regal Arthur. All right, just taking a quick breather here. The illustration on the cover was of a regal Arthur, decked out in his finest armor. Sorry, that message got distracted here. The illustration on the cover was of a regal Arthur, decked out in his finest armor. His mailed hands resting on Excalibur's mighty pommel. Such a simpler time when knights battled for chivalry and honor. In those days, you knew the good guys from the bad. A bolt of lightning illuminated the sky. Startling Bryce. The rain was going to begin falling soon, and the priest did not want to get caught in the open. He resumed his walk, hurrying to beat the storm. He would never make it. As he hurried through the streets, Bryce continued his private reverie. He was currently on leave, back home visiting his parents, as he awaited his next assignment. His missionary work as a Jesuit priest had taken him to Australia, the Middle East, and Europe over the years. He, like the knights in the bookstore window, followed vows. Only Bryce's were vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. His was the duty to act upon any command the Holy Father put to him, to work for the glory of God and defend the Roman Catholic faith from heresy, to educate the young. But recently he had begun to doubt certain things, not the least of which was his role in the Great Plan. Recently? No, not recently. Bryce's doubts started back in college, at Loyola, and later at Georgetown. They followed him through every foreign country, forcing him to seek answers to unasked questions. But answers, if there were any, always eluded. In a few days, he would get called back for a new assignment. He was sure of that. Instead, he would ask to leave the order. Perhaps on his own, he could discover the true meanings behind those areas that most fascinated him and frightened. He was still quite a number of blocks from his parents' house when a wave of energy rippled through the streets. Bryce turned to watch as the glowing wave rolled down the block. As it passed, store lights snapped off, car engines died. The wave hit Bryce and threw him to the ground. Before he could pull himself up, large drops of rain began to splatter on the sidewalk. In a matter of moments, Father Christopher Bryce was soaked to the bone. Just a minute here, and I have to just do a couple of quick comments here. I hope people who are there are enjoying the stream. If you're catching this later, I hope you are enjoying the stream as well. So, without further ado, let's carry on. Chapter 4. In his walk-up apartment on Flatbush Avenue, Mario Doselli snarled one last brutal snarl at the television as he kicked in its picture tube. The TV, the lights, the digital clock, and the radio. Everything had stopped working at once, and the storm had finally broken outside, dropping huge amounts of dark rain onto the earth. So much for the ball game, Doselli grunted. He flung his window up and stuck his head out into the rain. The foul water soaked his head, plastering his hair to his skull. He roared at the elements, not even aware that only minutes before he would have never done such a thing. Doselli turned to look in the direction of Shea Stadium and saw the Jungle Bridge. It appeared to drop straight out of the storm itself. One end lost behind the houses, buildings, and other obstructions, the other end hanging in the sky. He wasn't sure what it was, but was calling to him, touching some primal place in his soul. Doselli walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the street. He made his way past stalled cars and screaming people. Doselli changed. His shoulders hunched, his jaw thrust forward, and his knees bent as his shambling, knuckle-dragging walk carried him towards the ruins of Shea Stadium. Chapter 5. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, amen. Andrew Jackson Decker let the rose fall from his hand into the hole. He watched it drift down, a burst of red against the black of the hole, the gray of the day. Then the dirt was shoveled in, and the crowd started to depart. Most paid their final respects, heads bowed as they repeated some words of comfort to Decker, then moved on. That was the way of the world. Live, die, but life goes on. Decker felt the crumpled paper in his suit pocket and pulled it out. It was a telegram from President Douglas Kent, expressing his sorrow over the loss of his Victoria Decker and regretting that he could not attend a funeral in person. Decker let the telegram go. He didn't notice which way the wind took it. Ace? Decker looked up. Standing beside him was Jonathan Wells, Speaker of the House. He was one of the few people who remembered Decker's old nickname, and the one of the few that still used it. Come on, Congressman, Wells said. You'll have time to mourn later. Right now we have to go. Go? Decker asked. I have to go home. There are people waiting, and Wells gripped Decker's arm firmly. Ace, I know what you must be feeling right now. Vicky was a wonderful woman. I'm not denying that. But we have an incident. There's going to be a special session of both houses to discuss it in half an hour. Incident? John, what are you talking about? Wells looked up at the taller, younger congressman from Pennsylvania. New York has been, we're not sure what. Terrorists, a foreign power, youth gangs, a simple blackout, we just don't know. All communications have ceased over a rather large area of the northeastern United States, including portions of your constituency. Ace, the president and the vice president are in New York. We have no word of their condition yet. A possible attack on the United States? The top elected officials in danger? Decker couldn't focus on the concept. It was unthinkable, unreal. I don't understand. Neither do I, said Wells. But they need us to figure it out and decide what to do before someone else makes a terrible mistake. Decker nodded. All right, John, all right. Just give me a second, okay? Jonathan Wells smiled reassuringly. Take two, Ace. Then we've got to go. Chapter 6. Bryce ran through the rain-slicked streets, slipping and sliding, but never quite losing his balance. He didn't know what was happening, but if this was the end of the world, he wanted to spend his last moments before the judgment with his parents. He splashed through deep puddles and sped past men and women who were acting more like animals than people. Finally, after an eternity of running, he turned onto the tree-lined street where he grew up. And Christopher Bryce, ordained priest of the Order of the Society of Jesus, went insane. That was the only rational explanation his mind would accept. The houses on the street were demolished. It reminded the priest of news footage taken after earthquakes or bombings. But no force of nature or man did this. The creatures responsible were certifiably demonic. The largest of the beasts were the pair of armored lizards, each roughly twice the size of a tank. Their heavy plated shells were covered with sharp spines, and each had three spiked tails that swung back and forth to smash houses and telephone poles. Directing the monsters. Yes, directing them. Bryce was certain of that. Were 6 demons. They were reminiscent of lizards, but very tall and muscular, much broader than men, and they stood on 2 legs. One rode on the back of each armored monster, driving them forward with strangely shaped staves. Others followed behind them, dragging their long lizard tails behind them. As Bryce watched, the first of the great beasts smashed into his parents' home, knocking it apart as though it was made of matchsticks. At the same moment, the second armored monster crashed into St. Ignatius, the church and school across from the house where young Chris Bryce spent so many years learning and growing up. The sight of both of those memories collapsing beneath the weight of creatures from hell was more than Bryce could take. No, he screamed, raising his voice above the sound of the falling rain. No! The 4 walking lizard men turned in response. Now Bryce could see the oddly formed clubs they wielded. He could see their rain-slicked green scales. Worse, he could stare into their yellow eyes. The closest lizard rocked back on its long tail, pointing its club at Bryce, and the priest saw that the club still had leaves and roots. Did the lizard simply pluck some strange plant from the ground to use as a weapon? Bryce doubted that even the smallest of lizardmen, who stood over 6 feet tall, needed any sort of weapons to rip the short priest to pieces. Then, an amazing thing occurred. The lizard, still resting on its tail and pointing its club, opened its tooth-filled, beak-like jaw and screamed, "Stormer!" If he was mad, Bryce reasoned, he could stand here with no worry. These horrifying figments of his ill imagination would fade away, even as they reached out to touch him, if he were mad. Father Christopher Bryce turned and ran blindly into the storm. Chapter 7. Rick Adler watched the dinosaur men set up a crude camp at the base of the tram station. On the Manhattan side of the 59th Street Bridge, They covered the street and stretched back across the bridge, a seemingly unending stream of upright lizards. The entire mass of creatures rocked on their back on their long tails, silently gyrating their lizard bodies and chanting a hissing, raspy hymn. They seemed to be celebrating. The lizards were having a party, for God's sake. Alder moved away from the window and backed into the darkened room. He was in an office, somewhere on the 6th floor of a building overlooking the tramway. He remembered when they put the tram up. It must have been over 10 years ago. When Adler was still in high school. It was such a big deal then, a fancy cable car to connect Manhattan with Roosevelt Island. He even remembered riding it back then, waiting for a line with the others just to travel back and forth to the little island between the two boroughs. But that was the old world. Adler didn't understand what was happening. Not understanding it now. But he was sure that the old world was over. Its items put away for another time. He settled down on the floor, his back against the wall so that he could watch the door. The police officer was lucky to make it into Manhattan ahead of the dinosaurs. They moved fast for big creatures, quickly spreading out from Shea. He would have made it farther if his horse hadn't gone lame on him. Poor Simone saved his life back in Queens, galloping away from the jungle bridge when Alder merely watched in dread and fascination. But he had to leave her on the 59th Street bridge after her hoof caught in a broken patch of grating. The horse went down hard, and he was lucky to escape without further injury to his knee. He unconsciously rubbed it as he remembered, trying to force the pain away with his hand. It was starting to get dark by that time, and he was wet and miserable from the constant rain. It was either a fine place to hole up or try to make it through the dark on foot with the dinosaurs right behind him. He decided to hole up. This building was perfect. It was apparently empty when he arrived, and he found no evidence of occupation since. Also, it overlooked the bridge. Adler figured it would be prudent to watch the monsters and try to find out all he could about them. His survival might depend on such information. A quick check revealed that he had his utility belt and his accoutrements, including his service revolver, flashlight, and nightstick. His watch, a black Seiko with gold hatch marks, told him it was 10 minutes to 7. He tried his walkie-talkie again, but all that came over the speaker was static. He let the box drop to the floor and tipped his head back. In moments, he was nodding off, sleep finally claiming his tired body and mind. But a new sound forced his eyes open. He quickly became alert and listened. The chanting outside had changed. It was more excited than before, and if possible, more intense. Alder crawled back to the window and peered outside. It was darker now, and the rain made it even harder to see. But there was light down in the alien camp. Glowing balls of fire hung in the air throughout the camp, providing enough light to see by. The camp had grown. Now giant starfish floated over the crowd. The creatures were strikingly beautiful, as though made of stained glass, and the light caused them to sparkle as they moved. In addition, humans were now part of the camp, singing and gyrating with the lizards as though they belonged to the alien festivities. What few details you could make out startled the police officer. The people appeared more brutal, more primitive than your average New Yorker. But clothing they still possessed was in tatters, plastered to their bodies by grime and rain. Well, it's a little low. Sorry. Let me amp it up here a bit. Let me get there. How about now? Give you a few seconds here to respond. Any better? Good. All right. The clothing they still possessed was in tatters, plastered to their bodies by grime and rain. Over the eating the popcorn. Are you eating popcorn, Jaeger? Okay, good, good, good. At least I can. So let's see here. Alder watched, and for a moment he almost wanted to go down there, to throw off the chains of civilization and run naked through the rain. He had to concentrate to push the image out of his brain. Suddenly, the crowd parted to allow a new addition to emerge from the bridge. It was the great one-horned beast Alder had seen earlier. And atop it was the huge lizard man who seemed to command these masses. The lizard man raised his clawed hand high into the air, and the crowd went wild. Lizard and starfish and human alike responded with frenzied dancing and shouts of raw emotion. It was so primal. Alder felt his blood pumping and his heart racing. It was like being at a rock concert, only 10 times, no, 1,000 times more intense. Even if you didn't like the music, you couldn't help getting caught up in the emotion. He could feel himself moving with the crowd, bopping to the primitive beat the lizard camp was keeping. He wanted to raise his voice, to join their exhilarating song. The scene was so real. The great lizard man reached behind his massive bulk and pulled a young woman to the forefront. Alder realized that she must have been sitting there the whole time. She was as human as any young woman the police officer had ever seen. She wore what remained of a Met sweatshirt and jeans, but her clothes were in no way comparable to the humans in the crowd. Hers still resembled clothing. She tried to struggle, but her strength was nothing compared to the lizard man. Alder could not stop his swaying body, could not draw his eyes away from the scene in the streets below. The tension was almost sexual. The lizard man lifted the young woman high above his head, turning her to the crowd so the crowd could see. Even in such a precarious position, she continued to fight and squirm. This only made the crowd more agitated, and they danced faster in their lizard way. Even the humans among them swished non-existent tails in time with the frenzied beat. Alder kept time in his darkened window, letting his body respond as it wished. Not over her head, she doesn't. He watched the young woman battle with all her strength, and a part of his mind admired her defiance. But his body simply shook, vibrating where he stood in place. Then the woman's struggle ceased. With a roar, the great lizard man pulled the woman apart with one mighty snap and raised the snout to catch her raining blood. The crowd went wild, and total pandemonium took the street. Alder stopped moving. His mind shot back to who he was and what was happening. The silent numbness became silent rage, and the officer found that he hated the lizards and their leader. Hated what they were and what they did. Hated what they did to him. He would make them pay for that woman's blood. He swore it there in a darkened sixth floor office on the 60th Street. He watched into the night, and the crowd finally collapsed in exhausted, exhilarated sleep. Chapter 8. Purposefully, Christopher Bryce moved from the shadow to shadow, carefully avoiding the ruins that littered the darkened street. He had been running since that awful moment this afternoon when the demon spoke to him. He was wet and tired and angry, but his delusions of madness were gone. At least, if he had gone mad, then the world had gone mad with him. His running brought him back to his home, the place where he grew up. It was simple enough to lose the demons, as he was faster than they were. Still, they gave him a good chase, not stopping until he finally lost them in a maze of streets and alleys he had once navigated as a child. but they were persistent, and for all the priests knew, they were still searching for it. The house was shattered. The giant armored lizards had done a thorough job, but before he could move on, Christopher Bryce had to discover the fate of his parents. He owed them that much. He stepped carefully into the wreckage. By habit, he had entered by that section which was once the front porch. Now it was timber. As he dug his way through the debris, a glint of brass caught his eyes. He went over to it, and he saw that it was his mass kit. His mother had given the mass kit to him as a gift when he completed seminary. It was a black bag, much like a doctor's bag, which held the sacraments of his station. He never had the heart to tell his mother that the course he had chosen didn't call for him to administer Mass very often, as he wasn't going to be assigned to a parish. But he had it filled anyway, and it carried it with him from missionary post to missionary post. And to his surprise, he found that he would celebrate Mass more often than he had imagined. He reached down to pull the kit from the debris. The case was heavy, a familiar weight in an unfamiliar time. He wiped the dirt from the brass nameplate. Christopher Bryce, S.J., the plate read. Christopher, he thought. Christ bearer. Perhaps his parents had been prophetic when they gave him the name at his christening. They were the perfect parents, his father once told him, whose only imperfection was their children. Bryce never understood exactly what the old man meant, and never really wanted to. For all of their idiosyncrasies, he loved them dearly. He placed the Mass kit on the side and continued his search. He found his parents 30 minutes later, crushed beneath a roof beam. They weren't buried under tons of rubble as he had expected. They were both killed by the same heavy wooden beam, the bodies exposed to the rain. That would never do. Bryce spent the next few hours pulling his parents' body from the wreckage of the home they loved. He carried them across the street, one at a time, into the ruins of St. Ignatius. Part of the church still stood, one wall and part of the steeple, providing some protection from the unending downpour. The priest retrieved his Mass kit and administered last rites for his parents. He performed the duties of his calling with loving care. Then, with reverence, he buried them in the best tomb available, using the consecrated stones of the ruined church to form the final resting place. Goodbye, Mom, Dad, Bryce whispered to the stones. He placed a kiss atop the cairn, then wiped it at his teary eyes. He stood there watching the burial cairn for a long time. Chapter 9. Dr. Hachimaru too reports on her theory of the cosmverse to the General Council of the Academy of Sciences. Mara, she thought, as the images started to fill her mind. Calling Mara. Cosm, a dimension where a particular set of laws holds sway. A specific reality that can be quite different from another reality. Mara listened to her own voice explain the theory she had set forth to the Academy of Sciences 2 years ago. It was just after her 14th birthday, and the General Council dismissed her findings as the rantings of a young girl. A very gifted genius, they admitted, but a young girl nonetheless. Our own cosmos is just one of a multitude of dimensions that, together, form what I refer to as the cosmverse. Pardon me? As our own universe contains the whole of our reality, the cosmverse contains the whole of all realities. And what is possible here, using our laws of science, might not be possible in another cosmos, where a completely different set of laws govern the workings of their world. Mara adjusted the clarity of the input, reflexively checking the cable that led from her skulljack to the main terminal. Oh, they were impressed when the prodigy graduated from the college at the age 10. They clapped ceaselessly when she received a PhD in physics at age 12. They almost wept themselves with joy when the child genius received her second PhD, this one in microengineering, 1 year later. But when their prodigy, their trained SEAL, proposed something real, something that shook the status quo, they simply dismissed her. My findings also suggest that these cosms can be connected, allowing us to travel to another dimension for exploration, to make contact, whatever we deem appropriate. But there is a flip side to my findings. As we can travel to another cosm, the inhabitants of another cosm can travel here, to our reality. The young woman unplugged herself from the terminal and took a deep breath. She examined her research records backwards and forwards, over and over again. Always her conclusion was the same. The invasion had been her fault. She was to blame for the death and destruction that is about to happen again. Give me a second here, folks. A little drink. Chapter 10. In the early hours prior to dawn, Christopher Bryce found himself walking the familiar skyline across the water. He had made good progress throughout the night, as most of the monsters were resting. He passed close to their makeshift camps, but few stirred. A few times he heard things shambling around in the dark, just out of sight. He kept walking when such sounds assaulted him, moving him forward hardly a glance back. But as the sky began to brighten toward gray, more and more of the creatures started to become active again. What was worse, the closer he got to the 59th Street Bridge, the more of the lizard men he encountered. They were migrating across the bridge, and he was sure he would never make it to the other side through that unending mass. There might be another way, however, thought Bryce. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fistful of change. I even have a token, the priest said softly. He chuckled as he stepped down into the darkness of the subway station. There were no lights in the underground facility, so Bryce had to go slowly. He felt his way along the tiled wall with one hand. The other held fast to his mask kit. Since there was no electricity, he reasoned, the track should be safe to navigate. If he didn't step on the wrong and twist an ankle, if he didn't meet up with any of the dinosaurs, if he didn't run into a mugger. He laughed again and immediately regretted his loud outburst. Bryce paused to listen, but he heard nothing nearby. There were far-away echoes, but those sounds could be heard anything, coming from above or below ground. After another moment of rest, Bryce pressed on into the darkness. At least it wasn't raining down here, the priest thought. He made his way slowly to the token booth and took a few breaths. It smelled of a decade-old sweat and urine in the confines of the subway station, and the smell made Bryce gag. He suppressed a coughing fit, settled himself, then searched for the turnstile. Never let it be said that Christopher Bryce doesn't pay his own way, the priest said, as he deposited the token into the slot. Now, there should be another staircase around here somewhere. He found the stairs and descended further into the depths of the subway system. 1, 2, 3, he counted as he placed one foot upon a step, then another. 8, 9, 10. There should only be a few more, he thought. But as he stepped down, something jutted out into the darkness and caught his leg. Bryce stumbled, flailing into the darkness. The priest landed hard, but he fell only a few feet. Before he could get to his feet, however, the cold object was pressed into his neck, while a thin, sinewy arm wrapped around his neck. "What you doing down here, man?" a young voice asked him. "Don't you know this is our turf?" "I'm sorry," Bryce said carefully, "but it isn't safe above ground right now." "Ain't that the truth, huh, Coyote?" a second voice called out in the dark. "Be quiet, rat," answered the first voice. "Let's have some light." A torch flared to life, illuminating a small section of the platform. Holding up a baseball bat with burning rags wrapped around its top was a small teenager. He might have been all of 14, dressed in denim and sneakers. The older youth, perhaps 16 years of age, stepped back from Bryce, but kept his switchblade drawn. He was dressed in a similar fashion to the younger boy he called Rat, but he wore more leather. "What's in the bag, man?" Coyote asked as he reached for the fallen basket. "You a doctor or something, man?" "Please, I need that," Bryce protested. He reached for the black bag as well, his coat falling open as he moved. "Holy shit, Coyote!" Rat roared. "The guy's a priest!" Coyote's open hand slashed out, slapping Rat across the cheek. "I told you to watch your language, didn't I?" Bryce stepped forward, but Coyote's blade shot up. The priest stopped, watching the firelight glint off the sharpened steel. "Are you a priest, man? Are you?" Bryce nodded. "Yes, my name is Christopher Bryce." "Father Bryce, huh? Tell us, Father Bryce. Is it the end of the world? This is like apocalypse now?" "Apocalypse." It is pronounced apocalypse, and I don't know what's happening. "Where are you going, Father? Where are you trying to get to?" "To Penn Station. From there, I'll try to get through the Lincoln Tunnel and over into Jersey. Maybe the lizard men haven't gotten that far. Maybe the army has contained them to Manhattan and Queens." Rat, still rubbing his cheek, looked up at the older teen. "He'll never find his way by himself," he said, the words softly, but his eyes never left Coyote. "What are you looking at?" Coyote asked, shuffling beneath the younger boy's gaze. "Are we going to help the father, Coyote? Are we?" There was silence, and Bryce could almost see the thought process playing across Coyote's face. Were they alone and desperate enough to latch on to a troubled man of the cloth? The teen cleared his throat. "Yeah, Rat, we're going to help him," Coyote said, tossing the black bag to the priest. He snapped his switchblade shut. Chapter 11. As the sky turned from black to gray, Baruch Ka rose to greet the new day. What sensation he and his people had experienced already, and the conquest was but one day old. Oh, Lanala would be pleased. The great lizard man stretched to his full height, working out the kinks of his sleep. He surveyed the surrounding camp and watched for a moment as his followers did the same. They were all true Jakats, my people, worshippers of the goddess Lanala. I'm going to get this right again. Lanala, Baruch thought. And how the tribes have grown. There are many of this world's children among his numbers to this day. They, like so many others his holy jihad had encountered, had come out of their dead existence to embrace the life that he had championed as the first love of Lanala. Baruch Ka watched the Stallinger approach. From the corner of his large round eye, it was another world, converted to the life that the jackets preached. The star-shaped creature glided silently upon 5 swept-back arms, spinning gently in the morning air. Its translucent membrane was dark in color, a deep blue-black that reflected its mood. The news must be grim indeed, thought the lizard man, for it was to be so dark. He let the Stallinger swoop closer, then let it hover anxiously for a few moments before he turned to address the servant. "What news do you bring me?" the lizard man asked. The Stallinger uncoiled long, thin tentacles from pouches located on its underside. The tentacles snaked out and gently touched Baruch Ka's scaled head. It used the tentacles to play a combination of vibration, rubs, and taps upon the scales. In this way, it communicated to the lizard man, explaining that emissaries of the Torg had arrived. The lizard man turned away from the Stallinger and strained his neck over to see the crowd. He didn't need to. Standing beside him were 3 tall beings. Each had a small head atop a long neck, a broad, powerful chest, and long, thin legs. Wings folded around each other, each like dark cloaks, and sharp, pointed teeth jutted from long snouts. Baruch Ka was struck by their eyes. They had black, intelligent eyes that hinted of cruelty and worse. The lizard man liked those eyes. "The Torg sends his welcome, Baruch Ka, High Lord of the Jakats and Tsar of the Adinos." said the first of the Ravagons. He is impressed with the power of your reality and extends his wishes for a successful campaign, added the second. The third simply stood and watched, his black eyes fixed upon the lizard man. The High Lord's tail twitched nervously, and he fought to control its movements in front of these outsiders. The Torg, they said. These emissaries claimed to represent a being that did not, and could not, exist. The Torg, Bergdahl began, the first Ravagon silenced him with a glance. Do you deny our master's claim? Do you reject the power of Lord Byron Salisbury, the Gaunt Man? His great tail twitched faster as Baruch Ka tried to think. He was all-powerful in this reality and could dispatch the Ravagons with ease, but he needed the Gaunt Man's power and expertise almost as much as he feared him. His own power is nothing beside the Gaunt Man's. His experience is that of a hatchling to a full-grown warrior. Against such might, even the great Baruch Ka must bend. The High Lord of the Jakats bowed his scale head. I accept the Gaunt Man's claim. Very good, sneered the second Ravagon. We have been ordered to attend to your wishes as servants until such time as the Torg calls us back. Until then, our strength is at your disposal. Baruch Ka nodded his understanding. If these great demons were his to command, then he no longer needed to keep up the pretext of diplomacy. And besides, he had a realm to conquer. He climbed atop his faithful Udadak, settling his boat behind its one-horned head. He scanned the camp, which extended in all directions, and back towards the Maelstrom Bridge in what was once Flushing Meadows. Yes, all was going as he planned. All was good. With the added power of 3 Ravagons, he could not fail at this rate. He let out a mighty roar, which his followers quickly emulated. Baruch Ka, Sar of Tatik-Kur, leader of the Adinos, one of the 7 trusted High Lords, opened his jaws wide and drank of the falling rain. Then he roared again. Onwards, Adinos! For Lanala! For Baruch Ka! The Ravagons spread their wings and followed the frenzied crowd. Chapter 12. Mara checked herself in her lighted mirror. Her mane and silver hair was wild and untamed, keeping with the current style among people of her age. A painted black mask of makeup surrounded her eyes, and her black leather jumpsuit was tight and clinging. She might be a genius, but she was also a teenager. She moved from her living room cubicle into the lab area. Sitting at one of the engineering stations, Mara plugged into the ready computer and lowered her modified eye to the microscope. The data plate was in place, waiting to have some more information pressed into its memory circuits. She accessed a separate memory disk and watched as the coded information jumped from the disk to the data plate. As she watched, she remembered. I can't believe those disk errors and the General Counsel dismissed my findings, Alec, Mara said as she stormed around the apartment. Calm down, Mara, Dr. Kendall Alec IV suggested. With your enhancements, you might break something. I want to break something. I want to pound into their heads the importance of my findings. Be fair, Mara. Right now, all you have are calculations and theories. Yes, I've examined your research, and I agree with your conclusions. But the Council won't take you seriously until you have some form of tangible proof. If it's proof they need, then I'll just have to prove it, won't I? The coded entries continue to flow in a stream of magnetic data, writing themselves into the silver plate as Mara guided them with a skillful hand and computer-enhanced reflexes. She checked the flow of electrons, made a slight adjustment, then went back to her memories. Mara and her team built a special telescope. It was capable of breaking through the boundaries between the cosms to look at other realities. During one of the recording sessions, Mara's cosmoscope looked upon a world that was similar to her own. As one of the similarities that her calculations had suggested, 2 cosms where the laws of reality overlapped. It was these types of dimensions that were closest to each other, where the boundary of the cosmos was most fragile. However, Mara's reading suggested that the similarity was looking back. She took her new findings to the General Council, and they in turn took them to the World Council. This time they listened to Dr. Hachi. Cautiously, the planet Kanandra prepared to meet the new reality. While the World Council hoped that the meeting would be friendly, they insisted on also being ready for any hostilities that saved Kanandra. The war that followed lasted only 3 months. The alien reality broke through the boundary and attached strange bridges to Kanandra. Then, from the other side of those bridges, came the stuff of Kanandra's nightmares. Mara shivered and halted the process. She ran her right hand through her silver mane, taking a moment to let the memory settle. She flexed the fingers of her left hand, listening to the leather gauntlet stretch as she tightened her fist. She held the gloved hand in front of her face, watching her fingers uncurl. Slowly, carefully, she peeled the gauntlet away. The hand beneath was metallic, shot through with wires and printed circuitry. With a claw snapped from each finger, 5 sharp points that gleamed in the lab's bright lights. Just one of Dr. Hachimaru's 2 reminders of the war against the Sims. Reminders of what she did. It's almost over, Mara, Alec told her excitedly as he burst into the lab. We destroyed the last bridge. All that's left now is to erase the remaining Sims and... Mara spun away from her computer screen, trying to face Dr. Kendall. It might be over here, Alec. But there's something worse booting up. I found another cosm, and triple damn the Sims have found it too. It did not matter that it was happening an entire universe away. This just did not diminish the pain she felt with each new death. For, like on Kanandra before this impending destruction was her fault. Tears flowed from Mara's one natural eye, and she wiped them away, but she couldn't wipe away the memories. They continued to flow along with Mara's tears. Chapter 13. Alder watched the strange procession pass by his hiding spot. He was holed up in a radio shack on 3rd and 58th, trying to work his way over to the west side. He didn't get far, however, when he had to seek refuge. Now there was a parade of large dinosaurs shambling towards Central Park. Piled high on the back of each giant lizard were bodies, human bodies, victims of the lizardmen's slaughter. A crash sounded from further back in the store. Alder pulled his nightstick from his belt and moved away from the door. It was dark in the store. The only light was a rainy gray illumination coming through the display window. The officer slipped his flashlight into his other hand and snapped it on. Its strong beam showed him stacks of stereos and televisions, boxes of radio-controlled cars, and racks of cables, wires, and other electronic do-it-yourself paraphernalia. A pile of calculators had fallen across the service counter. Alder slowly swept the area with his light, stopping when glowing eyes met his. They belonged to a small gray cat with a red collar. It gave Alder a look that said, "Feed me or take a hike." The officer smiled, relaxing his bunched muscles. That was when something large smashed into him. Alder went flying to a computer display. His flashlight and nightstick sailed away from him. As the flashlight spun around on the floor, it threw odd shadows. Alder saw 3 forms advancing toward him. First as shadows against the window, then as humans in tattered rags. When the light spun, it beamed their way. There were 2 men and a woman. Each appeared more brutal than the one before. The larger of the men stepped closer, revealing Cro-Magnon features as the light beam spun around again. "Cop," the large brute grunt. "Fuck," the woman laughed, flashing crooked, sharp teeth. Alder decided not to attempt conversation with the group. Instead, he drove his foot into the brute's midsection, then rolled behind a pile of clock radios and quickly got to his feet. The smaller man and the woman approached cautiously, acutely aware of their moaning companion lying on the store floor. The woman held her hands like claws, again showing her teeth. She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Instead, Alder heard the sounds of primitive passion, and it reminded him of the scene by the bridge the night before. What happened to you? He asked, trying to make sense of the situation. Lanala, the woman laughed. Baruch Ka. Then the small man leapt, hurling a display as he reached for Alder's neck. He never made it. A massive scaled arm caught the man in mid-leap, then sent him sailing into the far wall. Alder gaped as the lizardman turned towards him, then held his flashlight in his other hand, playing the beam into Alder's face. The woman's roar reminded the officer of the remaining danger, but she was upon him before he could react. Her leap knocked them both to the floor as she attempted to bite and claw him. The officer struggled, but it was all he could do to keep her teeth and nails away from his neck and face. She was strong, he had to admit. Maybe she was on some kind of new drug. Her left hand broke free of Alder's grip, and she slashed out with dirt-caked fingernails. They dug into his right cheek, drawing deep gashes of red across his face. Then, as quickly as she attacked, she was gone. The officer looked up as the lizard man smashed her with his heavy forearm. She collapsed without so much as a sound of protest. The first brute appeared to have recovered somewhat, but the fight was out of him. He ran into the street, leaving his companions behind. Alder and the lizard man regarded each other warily, curiously. The lizard examined the flashlight for a moment, reverently turning it over its massive claws. Then it extended it to Alder. The officer tried to get a sense of the creature's intention. He had no common experience to judge this by, so he took the light as it was offered, nodding a thank you. Tall, too, the lizard man said. Then he repeated it, thumping his chest. That must be his name, Alder thought. No, not it. He guessed. Rick Alder, the officer said, thumping his chest just as Tall Two had. You saved my life. Thank you. The gray cat rubbed up against Alder's leg. He bent down and lifted the cat, gently scratching it behind the ears. You're not like the others, are you, Tall Two? Alder asked, not expecting an answer. But Tall Two provided him with one anyway. The lizard reached down and petted the cat. Chapter 14. The trek through the subway passed for Bryce as a dreamy, detached memory. After leading him down onto the tracks, Coyote and Rat doused a torch. Immediately, Bryce missed the fluttering, smoky light. The uniform blackness was unending and quiet. After a failed attempt at a small talk by the priest, the three fell silent. So Bryce concentrated on placing one foot in front of the other, on keeping a hand on Coyote's shoulder, on listening to Rat's cracking gum. Bryce lost track of time. It seemed as though the only reality in the dark tunnels was the pain in his legs and the leather jacket he held to firmly. His mind turned to other things. He listed his experiences of the past 2 days, the creatures he had seen, reconstructing events as he understood them. Could these be the last days? Certainly there were similarities between what he saw and what John described in the Book of Revelations. But were those lizards some type of demon? Was the judgment day at hand? The priest tried to recall specific passages, tried to form the words in his mind. But for once his memory failed him. The words would not come. He tried to pray, but that too failed to come. Coyote halted abruptly. Bryce banged into him, unaware of the boy's intentions. Then the youth was gone. Coyote! Bryce called, suddenly very afraid of being left in the dark by himself. Cool it, Father, whispered Rat as he grasped Bryce's hand. We reached Lexington Avenue and Coyote just wants to check out the station before we keep going. Lexington Avenue. The first stop in Manhattan on the E and F lines, Bryce thought. He hefted the familiar weight of his mask kit, then leaned against the pillar to wait. Moments later, then Bryce said, "Why are you down here, Rat?" "The same reason as you, man," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. "Well, what about your parents?" "Don't got none. I mean, we don't got none or no more. We're orphans, man. We only got each other. But we take care of ourselves real good." "Sure we do," Coyote said, his voice reaching out of the darkness. "The station's clear, preacher man. You can go now." "What were you looking for, Coyote?" "Gangs, lizards, wino, you name it, man. It might be down here." "Yeah," Rat said. "If you're asleep, they might bite your ass." Bryce wasn't sure, but he thought he saw Rat smile in the darkness. Then they moved on. Well, chapter 14. We've been going for a while here, so I'm going to call the stream right now. Spread the word that we're reading these stories. Like, comment, spread the good word. And if you want to, just let people know that I stream again here, and I'll keep reading. So, start at chapter 15 of this book. So we will talk to you guys later.